It's going to make it easier for people to be slot machine developers.
Welcome to Tiptoe, where tech meets the road, where CTOs share the tales and the comments. From startups to big names, innovations unfold. How many CTOs will share their stories untold?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of your favorite podcast, the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. My name is Scott Porad, and this is my trusty co-host.
Brad Hefta-Gaub.
Brad, I've got some exciting news to report.
Tell me, I'm excited to hear this exciting
We
news.
we have another listener.
Oh, we do.
Yes. I want to share with you a text message I received. This listener wrote in and they said, what did they say? Listening to your podcast with Stephanie Silvestri. Very interesting, entertaining, even for me. It popped up when I opened podcasts. I thought I would listen for a few minutes to something else. Your podcasts are usually a little over my head. From my very own mother.
That's high praise. That's high praise right there.
It is high praise. So my mom is now listening to our podcast, so I have to watch my language.
Uh-oh. What about me?
Be
Do I have to
careful.
watch my language too?
No, you can just curse left and right. Right before we started recording, you were about to say to me, I've got a friend that. And I said, wait, that sounds like good podcast material. So what were you going to say there?
I think you were asking me about my latest efforts to tame the agents as they work on code, and
Yes, are
I
you
was gonna
cracking the whip with your agents?
with my agents, and I was gonna mention that a good friend of mine who is, but like I've always thought his name's Kelly Smith, by the way, super smart guy. He is just the most entrepreneurial he's like one of the most entrepreneurial persons I've ever known. And he's
Hmm.
always been in tech, but he isn't like a classically trained engineer.
Hmm.
And he is absolutely crushing it and loving the speed with which he can build software now. And he's always been very technically minded, always been very product minded, and
Hmm.
he's just doing amazing stuff. And he was lamenting the other day that it's actually quite physically draining
Hmm.
to essentially manage all of these agents.
Hmm.
And, he even mentioned that it was like negatively affecting his sleep score or whatever. I don't know if he's
Hmm.
a Aura or Whoop or some other Apple Watch guy, but clearly like he was feeling it affecting his physical health. And I can relate a little bit to that. I think that it's the type of thing that I sometimes feel, I work with a lot of different teams. I got all these different projects I'm working on, not just professionally, but I do my search and rescue and ski
Hmm.
patrol and all that stuff. And yeah, it can be very draining to kind of constantly be context switching, you know,
Hmm.
and especially like making like I'm going to say executive, like small e executive decision making
Hmm.
for lots of different projects and lots of different teams. And I
Hmm.
think that I think what Kelly was describing is not uncommon for managers and leaders in very flat organizations.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's essentially what we have with our army of agents is a super flat organization.
You're telling me about how you've got this org that's really flat now. And I have this visual in my mind of like you're just trying to keep a bunch of plates spinning and hope that they don't fall down, and you jump from one to the other and one to the other. And I would imagine it is sort of physically draining. And depending on what you're doing, if you're accountable to other people, now you're taking on more and you got to keep those plates spinning.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of something that's happened to me happened as a strong word that I discussed in the last week with one of my children.
Oh, tell me.
Did you read the book Sapiens by Yuval Harari?
That sounds super familiar, but I'm drawing a blank on it right now.
Well, it was super popular. So it's Yuval Harari is a professor type, and he wrote a book called Sapiens about Homo sapiens. And I'm going to try to just summarize it very briefly here for our audience. I'll start by saying I recommend it. I think it's a great read. And he's talking about how we are Homo sapiens. So there's like Homo is the genus and sapiens is the species. And there were other Homo species like Homo erectus and Homo
Hmm.
this, that, or the other thing. Like the Neanderthals, they were like Homo neanderthalis or whatever. And so he's writing about what separated, why did Homo sapiens, us, become dominant? What was it that become dominant? And most people attribute it to the agricultural revolution.
Hmm.
And he attributes it to something else. He goes back further in time and he talks about what he referred to as the cognitive revolution.
Hmm.
And specifically, the ability for groups of people to understand and believe in things that don't exist.
Hmm.
So, for instance, the country of France, you believe the country of France is a thing, right?
Right.
It's got a passport, it's got a flag,
But what is
but
it?
there's no France. France is just a thing that we all believe in.
Right.
There's no, I mean, maybe France has a fence up at its border with Spain and border with Portugal. I don't know, but probably not. It's a cognitive
It's a
concept.
concept.
The idea of having these concepts that we can believe in, like a religion, right? Or a country or all sorts of things allowed larger and larger groups of people to cooperate. And
Mm.
fundamentally, it was the ability of larger and larger groups of people to cooperate that allowed us to be more dominant. Well, whether I don't know whether in the book he said to be more dominant over other species or just be more equipped to
Successful.
survive, get more successful with survival. So, and then he got to talking about the agricultural revolution, and this is where it connects to AI for me. He talks about how the agricultural revolution had this big unintended consequence. So, a positive consequence of the agricultural revolution for Homo sapiens was that now we could have more offspring because we could support them.
Yeah.
But the unintended consequence was that now we had to work more to actually harvest more food to feed them, right? It became a catch 22. At first, it was, oh, I've got more food so my offspring can survive. But then our species started to have more offspring, and then you needed to have more food.
Yeah.
So it's all because that like some guy in the Middle East figured out how to make wheat come out of the rocks to grow it to feed his family. That now you today are having to spin a lot of AI plates.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I
And so you can thank, our Homo sapien ancestor caveman for this problem.
yeah, there you go. Well, so one of the things that well, I'm kind of curious. I threw a bunch of ideas at you about things that we could talk about today.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because I actually think that I mean, obviously there's a tiny little bit of all these read a little bit on AI, but more and more I've just been thinking about how the things that I hear people lamenting about
Hmm.
AI, they just don't feel like AI problems to me.
Okay.
They feel like engineering problems to me.
Okay. Well, I asked AI, you sent me three topics, and I
Hmm.
asked AI which one we should talk about. And AI picked topic number three.
Coding skills atrophying and growing junior engineers into seniors.
Yes, which is a real problem.
Yeah.
How's that going to happen?
So this is a good one. I want to talk about, is this really a new thing? Okay. So
Okay.
let me tee this up in the following way. The thing that I've heard in the zeitgeist lately is like, oh, AI is all about people just pulling the slot machine arm and getting a result. And when they don't like the result, they just pull the slot machine arm again. And they keep pulling the slot machine arm until they get a result that they like. First of all, have you heard this as the description of like coding with AI?
I haven't, but you do put tokens into slot machines. So it's kind of the same.
Right? I think this is, first of all, obviously, the people using this terminology are using it to describe a mindless behavior,
Hmm.
an addictive behavior, a behavior that lacks agency for the humans.
Hmm.
No pun intended, agency.
Hmm.
I started thinking a lot about this, and I have a memory. There was a time, this was a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, and I was I was working on virtual reality, and it was an
Hmm.
exciting space for me because I'd always kind of wanted to work in computer graphics, but the way that my career went, I didn't get to work in computer graphics until
Hmm.
like pretty late. I mean, streaming and video codecs and stuff like that, that you can think of that as computer graphics. But I'd always kind of wanted to work in like CGI, graphics like in movies and stuff like that. And I didn't get to
Hmm.
work on that. And then the virtual reality, I became the CTO of a virtual reality company, and it was my first chance at like, oh man, I get to learn about this really cool thing, which is computer graphics that I've always wanted to learn about. And I was working at one point, I was trying to solve some problem that was basically a pretty simple problem in sort of like computer graphics space. It was like I think specifically it was like I was trying to determine if a point was inside of a triangle uh
Hmm.
in 3D space, right? So the triangle exists in 3D space, a point exists in 3D space, and is the point on the surface of the triangle?
I must say something that to satisfy my grandfather, may his
Yes.
memory be a blessing. I think you mean a pyramid, not a triangle.
No, I meant a triangle, like a planar surface in 3D space. I just wanted to know like this little triangle in 3D space.
But it must have at least had 1 pixel of depth.
Ah, well, herein lies the rub, right? This is this is
Okay.
this is where this is where the math becomes interesting, right? So
Right.
there's math, and the fast way to basically matrix operations is the answer. Like you do matrix
Hmm.
operations, and it'll tell you the answer to this question.
Hmm.
But I had written this unit test suite, and like I kept getting false. I kept getting failures where I was like, look, I know this point should be on this line, and it kept coming back false, and I was just like, what's going on here? And one of the engineers was, this savant mathematician guy and knew this stuff inside and out. And I remember asking him, and he was just like so frustrated he had to explain this, you know, to the CTO. Like the CTO should
Hmm.
know this. Eventually I was like, I had gone to Stack Overflow and I had
Hmm.
found like this exact problem described on Stack Overflow. And I
Hmm.
got the code to do the thing and I had plugged it into the test suite. And then uh, it didn't work. It kept failing my test. And this engineer said to me, and it's just this quote will live in infamy for me. He just said, Brad, you can't just download code from the internet. And it was like such an iconic like quote that like it got written on the quote wall of the
Hmm.
startup office. And I was like, okay, fine. And so then eventually I was just like, okay, you go solve this. Like you do this. Like
Hmm.
this is easy. It's hard for me. Just do it.
Hmm.
Right. And sure enough, he went and came back. And guess what? His implementation also failed in the exact same way. And eventually I was just like, this is still not working. And
Hmm.
I went and it turns out that the code that he wrote was also a direct copy from a Stack Overflow post that he was the author of.
Ah, interesting.
And so, and it turned out that the whole reason is actually basically if the point is on the line, if its point is exactly on the line, you basically just have to decide, is it inside or is it outside of
Hmm.
the triangle, right? If it's
Right.
exactly on the line, it's kind of both inside and outside, and
Schrodinger's point.
yeah, you just have to decide which way you wanted it. And my test basically assumed it was on the inside, and the
Yeah.
way the algorithm was written, it was assumed to be on the outside,
Hmm.
right? So
Yep.
the moral of that story is this was well before AI.
Hmm.
And I was just pulling the slot machine arm. I was just trying to I didn't really he was not wrong to say you can't just download code from the internet, right?
Right. Okay.
You
When you downloaded the code from Stack Overflow, you were just pulling the slot machine arm.
I was just pulling the slot machine arm and I didn't really understand it. And eventually I got there and understood why it was failing, right? But it took the moment of like the getting past my imposter syndrome of not understanding the math and then having the guy that clearly understands the math fail in exactly the same way I failed for us to be able to have the conversation. Oh, I see what you're doing. Now all of a sudden we're not talking past each other. Now we actually
Hmm.
understand this and we now understand the correct answer. So it was no longer just downloading code from the internet. It was actually
Hmm.
understanding it.
So people say it's just pulling the slot machine arm. They're really saying people are writing code. Writing isn't really the right word. People are putting code in their applications that they don't understand how it works,
Right.
and that people have always put code in their applications that they don't understand how it works because they've copied it from the internet, or if you will, they have downloaded a third-party library that they've integrated that they didn't totally understand how it works and gave maybe wasn't documented well or gave unusual or unexpected behaviors, or they copy pasted, as people like to say, from some other part of the code base and say, well, I'll just stick this here. It seems close enough. That's the same problem.
And I've also heard that described, and I like the term cargo culting, right? So
Cargo coding.
yeah, so cargo culting is like there's a Wikipedia article on cargo
Mhm.
culting, but like
Okay.
during World War II, like random stuff washed up on the beaches of
Hmm.
these small islands that had not had first contact with Western man. And
Hmm.
so the natives basically created these gods out of the fuselage of an airplane or something like that.
Interesting.
And so this notion of cargo culting, like I found this object and I'm venerating this object, but I don't
Yeah.
really understand what it is,
Don't
right?
really understand what it is. Well, okay, I have a few responses to this whole thing. One of them is I think when people talk about the developing junior engineers to senior engineers problem, I think they're actually talking about it's a variation of what you're saying, which is we will have all these people who don't really understand their code, but in your case, you have the skills to understand it. And I think people are saying people won't even have the skills to understand it.
Doesn't that sound like exactly the statements that were made by all the C++ engineers who were up in arms about Visual Basic?
Yes, for sure. Now, I'm hearing a voice in my head of a friend who would say, but the difference between Visual Basic and Claude is that Visual Basic was deterministic. So I was just talking to somebody yesterday, as a matter of fact. They were talking, this was a business type person, not an engineer, but they had been using Claude or one of these things, probably Claude, to make some sort of Excel spreadsheet. And they were getting frustrated because they'd iterate on it 3 or 4 times and maybe even more. And then Claude, they'd ask it to change a part of it. And then Claude would change some unrelated part of it. That was very frustrating to them. Because
Yeah.
after spending quite a while on this, the guy was like, I probably would have just been faster to do it on my own. And I'm also reminded of another friend of mine who is not a software engineer, but was making a little video game using Claude. And it was interesting. I was testing it with him. And by saying I was testing with him, I was trying to play it and finding all these problems. And it was interesting because he was just vibe coding and he's not in the engineering space at all. And I think he just had no idea what was going on, no idea what's going on underneath. And I asked him some stuff like, well, so do you have this checked into source control or anything? Like version, can you go back to the previous version? And he was like, yeah, what's that? What's source control? You
Right.
know?
Right. Right.
So those are all things. So, but here's my counter to this whole thing. We've talked before on this podcast about how everybody's becoming a tech lead or everybody's becoming an engineering manager. On the one hand, those, well, I guess I'm going to say something, and then I immediately, as the words were coming out of my mouth, I thought to myself, actually, maybe that's not even true. What I was going to say was, well, those were skills kind of unrelated to software engineering that people had to learn. But
You
I
mean
guess you kind of,
how to be a tech lead?
yeah, how to manage, how to understand requirements so you could translate them into a plan or manage your team of robots that you got working on there, or even come up with the requirements and the user stories and the acceptance criterias and things like that. But we learned those things from having done the work and kind of probably make certainly through some apprenticeship, but also having maybe made some mistakes along the way too. And said, okay, well, I better not ship that code on Friday again. Right. So like,
Like I agree with all that. And what I'm saying is that how many people went to, HTML JavaScript boot camps
Hmm.
and walked away with a website, didn't really understand how JavaScript works? So many.
A lot, most, and then I'll take the next question. I won't take the next question. I'll ask the next question. Of those, what percentage continued their learning so that they did understand?
Well, that's the crux of the question.
Right.
I think of probably there is a percentage of them that stopped. There's a percentage of them,
Most.
most probably, just sort of like learned the plug and play,
Hmm.
and that was able to get them pretty far for a long time.
Yes.
And when they ran into a problem, they posted on Stack Overflow
Hmm.
and downloaded code from the internet that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
That got them past the next thing. A lot of them didn't actually get any better. And all of that happened. All of that happened and was
Hmm.
happening at scale before the latest. You're just pulling the slot machine arm. You're just
Right.
downloading
Right.
code
Yeah.
from the LLM,
Yeah.
right? How is you can't just download code from the LLM any different than you can't just download code from the internet.
I hear you. So what you're arguing then is I don't think this is a real problem. Or actually differently, it's always been a problem and it's always been suboptimal. I guess then the question is let's just think of it as proportions, right? There was some proportion of the industry that had expertise, some proportion of the industry that was just pulling the slot machine. Is this just going to make it so that we're all pulling the slot machine?
Well, I don't buy that, but certainly there's some people out there that that's what they're convinced of.
Well, here's what I would say in favor of that argument. If you, Brad, you are a software engineer with many, I won't age you on
That's
this,
okay.
with many
I've been writing
years.
code for more than 40 years.
Yeah, okay, well, you can age you. So you have many years of experience. So when you pull the slot machine lever and get some code, you can go in there and figure out what's going on if you want to. And is the effect of what AI is doing is making it so we just have a greater percentage of people. Or actually, let's phrase it differently. If you didn't have the 38 years to get you to these 40 years, if your first 38 years would have been there, where would you be? Someone coming out of school today isn't going to get those first 38 years. They're going to go straight into slot machine land.
And this is where, okay, fair enough. I think there's a percentage of people that are going to do that. But I think those people already were in slot machine land just downloading code from the internet. And I think
No,
it,
I don't think so. I don't think so. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
yeah, I'm going to make my case here.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no reason why I can't have the LLM write the code and then read the code and
Right.
then ask the LLM, I don't understand what you did here. Can you explain this to me? That's how I learned from the experts that came before me. Is I
Yes.
read
Okay.
their
So
code and
I
when
will.
I didn't understand it, I asked them to explain it to me.
Okay. I was very excited for a minute because I thought we had a real disagreement, but we don't. Damn it.
Well,
Oh,
so I'm just saying, like, I just feel like I heard somebody else say this, and I was just like, oh yeah, that's pretty clever. And it was something like, look, you should absolutely be using AI and generative AI. You absolutely should be doing it for every job that you have. Now, there's two different ways you can use it. One way is the lazy way, and the other way is the curious way. And if you use AI as a in a curious way, where whenever you use it to grow yourself. You use it to explore new spaces. You use it to learn something. You ask it, explain this to me. I don't understand how this works. Help me understand this. Give me references to explain this to me, right? Then it's a powerful enabler for growth and learning.
agree.
And the other alternative is I'm just going to be lazy about it and have it do the work and I'm not going to understand it.
Well, yeah, I guess the only place where we have disagreement, which is not nearly as exciting as where I thought it was going to be, it's going to make it easier for people to be slot machine developers.
To be lazy.
It's going to make it easier, for no doubt. I don't think in the olden times, meaning just a few years ago, yeah, people who weren't going to be lazy a few years ago are going to be lazier now, and that is going to inhibit them from becoming a more talented software engineer, because they're not going to really know how it works, and that's easy. And for the simplest reason why, I can explain it the most simple way. There are more Stack Overflow articles in Claude than there are in Stack Overflow.
Yep.
And so, like, lots of times you couldn't find the answer in Stack Overflow,
Yep.
and you had to sit there and you had to figure it out and talk to your coworkers and go through the debugger step by step and reason about what the hell is happening here. And then you had to have some person come over and say, well, if you think about how this language works and how it's going down into the machine and so on and so forth, and kind of work through all the layers, oh, this must be what's happening and why it works this way. And I would, and this is a total sidebar. I always have thought a topic that's an interesting topic of discussion, one that I do not feel equipped to discuss, is just the sort of different philosophies behind different languages and how they work, because
Oh
they have
yeah.
different intentions behind them, and, and that
Yeah, totally.
causes bugs and problems. Because if you don't understand how this language works over that language, whatever, beside the point.
But that
And
was one of my
so,
favorite, by the way, one of my favorite classes in my CS degree
right,
was the languages class. You know,
yeah,
because
interesting,
then
yeah,
because you get to sample all these oddball languages and like why why is Lisp how is Lisp different than COBOL versus
right.
PL1
So,
versus whatever.
yeah, so let's just catch up for a second here. You think this is a problem that's already existed?
Yes.
I guess we have a little disagreement, which is you think people who would have been lazy before are going to be lazy now. And I would make the case that I think it's probably a little easier for people to be lazy now than it was before, because, as I said, there's Claude can answer more questions than Stack Overflow could.
I'm not
But
sure
if
how
you
hard I'm going to lean into that one. Like, I might actually agree with you a little bit on that, that it's easier to be lazy and get results. So like I think that's a fair statement. It is easier to be lazy than it used to be and still get reasonable results.
right, and where I think now here is an interesting question. Here we can reveal the date of recording this, which is June 11th. And for those of you keeping score at home, it was either June 10th or June 9th that Anthropic released Fable.
Yep.
And so here's another interesting question. As the models advance, it gets easier and easier and easier to be lazy. And does it get to a point actually where, okay, so I guess what we're saying is it's getting easier to be lazy, but it's still unsafe to be lazy. You can still write code that doesn't perform well, or let's just actually make it more simple. There's always been an inverse relationship between pulling the slot machine arm, being lazy, and the complexity of the system. And as the models advance, does it make it so that you can be lazier and lazier on increasingly complex systems safely, right? You can have a system that's performant and stable and secure and all these different things at scale in a lazy fashion. That's what people are ultimately predicting when they're saying you won't need software engineers anymore.
Right. I saw a video where somebody was reviewing Fable and they used the phrase and it's got good taste.
Hmm.
Now that was the one line in that review where I was kind of like, if that's accurate, then that's actually meaningful. And
Yeah.
so I reacted to that in that most of what software in my career, most of what software engineering has always been about is it's not the writing of the code. It's the figuring out what you want the code to do.
Hmm.
It's the deciding of this. It's the pounding that thing into the shape that is the shape that matters. It's understanding the shape that matters. Coding it once you have the shape has never been the hard part.
Right. And to continue with this, I think part of figuring out that shape is this gets to the complexity thing. How do I build a complex shape, right? Or a shape
And
that can support greater and greater complexity without falling
and the
apart.
more decisions that the complex more in the more sort of like decisions made as you pound out the complex shape,
Hmm.
the more opinionated the shape,
Hmm.
which inevitably complex shapes have lots of little opinions in them. right?
Lots of big opinions.
It's
Yeah,
the opinions. It's the opinions that matter.
it is. And if you make the wrong, if you form the wrong opinions, you get rigid systems, right?
Exactly. Or you get a thing that looks like it's doing what you want it to do, but it's not accounting for this one thing, this one subtle. But again, like I'm just going to say, like this is a good example of like a junior versus senior engineering mistake, right? How, oh, the API, what happens if someone calls the API with an incorrect parameter? Like, how do we
Hmm.
handle that case? Right?
Yeah.
And like the junior engineer, the early junior engineer who hasn't stubbed their toe on this yet, right?
Hmm.
Just doesn't consider it and it fails with a seg fault. It fails with a crash, right? And the somewhat more experienced engineer knows to say, should I fail closed, fail open? Should I return an error?
Hmm.
How do I return that
Hmm.
error? You know,
Right.
the senior engineer is like, oh, okay. Here's how we're going to fail closed because this is a security thing, or we're going to fail
Hmm.
open because it's not a, whatever. Like they have more
Hmm.
judgment about that,
Hmm.
right?
So just to clarify something, what the author of that review said that Fable has taste, and your taste, your view is taste is, I think this is the right way to say it. Taste is having the correct opinions
Yeah, I think
or the
that's
most effective opinions.
Yeah, and I think that that's another term that there's being thrown around here. Like you know, uh, those of us that argue for, hey, this stuff is really compelling, but you need a strong engineering mindset
Hmm.
to direct it correctly. We
Hmm.
use the term taste has been used to
Hmm.
describe like the human experience and wisdom that causes you to be able to direct it in the right direction to solve things. And
Yeah.
this reviewer essentially was saying like, "Oh, I one-shotted this thing. Here's like five things I one-shotted,
Hmm.
and I really liked the outcome, and it made decisions that had good taste, and I didn't tell it. I didn't give it the taste.
What was he making? Was he making a blog?
Whatever, he made like, uh, one was like a sort of like the name there's like the famous like mythical library of every piece of paper ever written,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
um it's described in some epic poem or something like that, and
Hmm.
he basically one-shotted it doing that, and literally it like had every fucking everything in the
I
on the internet,
I have a problem with the phrase one shot because this is just a family friendly show and that just sounds like porn to me. So, God, I hope my mom isn't listening to
And
this
did she get
episode.
to this point in the pod?
So,
At least we didn't call it the money shot.
oh God. Okay, so yeah, here's the thing. I guess the question about taste then, I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it. I mean, fundamentally, is taste academic or is taste fully documented somewhere, or which, if it was true, would allow the models to have taste in them? Or is taste, to come back to pornography, is taste something more akin to pornography? You really only know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And if taste is something that has been written down somewhere in the world, then the models can have it.
Certainly the answer to what is the right way for a senior engineer to implement error handling in a RESTful API,
Mhm.
like that is written down. And it's been argued back and forth. And so the model can sit there and have a well-reasoned argument for why it chose to do that a certain way. That a junior engineer early in their career
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily have, but would
Mhm.
get by doing it wrong, being mentored by a senior engineer, having a production audit, whatever it is that we learned, the school of hard knocks, right? To learn the better way to do it, right?
Oh, I just had a light bulb go off. Okay, so let me tell you what happened in my head while you were saying that. While you were saying those things, I was just thinking to myself, so what's it matter if the LLM can get it correct? What does it matter that the junior engineer doesn't know those things anymore? And then the light bulb went off, and I was like, oh, the job of engineering is changing. Because now what the junior engineer has to know is not how do I make this error handling work well for my situation? And I know because I've made mistakes and I know the requirements and so on and so forth. The junior engineer has to know something totally different. They have to know how to talk to the LLM. They have to know how to say, they have to know how to say this. I need to make error handling here. What do I need to consider? And it's going to say, well, you need to consider XYZ PDQ. Is this a public thing or a private thing or whatever, et cetera? And and then that's how you have to interact with the LLM so that it can build the right thing for you. You have to know how to tell it you have to know how to have a conversation with it to understand what you need to know how to tell it the requirements. But if you don't even know what the scope of requirements is, you have to know how to talk to it so it can tell you this is the set of things I'm trying to decide
And
between.
yeah, first of all, no argument from me on that. Agree 100%. And what I'm saying is, again, I'm going to sound like a little bit like a broken record. That challenge of, as a junior engineer, knowing what's important, learning to know how to talk
Hmm.
to the code, learning how to talk to your teammates about the code, learning how to listen and learning how to understand when to move fast and when to move slow. It has always been the case that a
Hmm.
percentage of engineers, and I would argue a not small percentage of engineers, never really took the time to learn those things. And they just cargo culted or pulled the slot machine arm to get to wherever they were. And those are the ones that are candidly during the massive hiring boom that happened, around the pandemic, right? And zero interest rate. And
Hmm.
we're now seeing layoffs. And some people are saying those layoffs are happening because of AI. And I would say, I have a feeling that no, maybe you could say it's AI, but it also could just be they were a bunch of middling engineers, right? Not everybody that's been laid off. Certainly some of them are very strong engineers and whatever, were caught up in the wave or something like that. But I I mean, I know I've worked with a bunch of engineers who just weren't good at engineering before AI existed.
Yeah, I think you can flip it around though and say, look, the engineers, okay, so if the question is, what are we going to do about the junior to English, the junior to senior engineer pathway in the future? You're fundamentally saying it's the same thing. It's the same problem. It's actually like a different execution of the problem, so to speak. Before, as an engineer, you had to know how to look at a ticket or look at a spec and develop through intelligence and experience the intuition for where you needed to ask and learn more and where you didn't know enough. And some engineers were very talented at that, being able to sit down with whoever was requesting and saying, hey, just got a few questions about this. So you said you want me to make the flux capacitor go to 66 miles an hour, 88 miles an hour. It was 88 miles an hour, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In Back to the Future. Okay, you said you wanted to go to 88. So what am I supposed to do in the case where like it goes to 89?
Right.
Right. And or that'd be an example, right? So some people were talented at that. They had that intuition of just
They had
thinking through
curiosity.
I suppose curiosity. Yeah, curiosity. That's a great way of. And so what has to happen now is that person has to have this apply that same curiosity in a different way, just like that person was being curious and exploring the request that was being made of them. Now they have to actually be curious and explore not only the request that's being made of them, but explore with the agent writing the software
Yeah.
how they plan to write the software. How do you plan to do that? Why are you thinking of doing it that way? Why did you choose to use that a database instead of just putting it in a flat file? What are you thinking? Why are you thinking of doing it that way? And so now suddenly, I mean, this comes back to the light bulb I just had a minute ago. The job is just entirely different. It's still curiosity that makes you talented or that makes you maybe learn it, causes you to learn it so you can be good, but you have to apply your curiosity in a very different way.
Okay. I I think we're pretty closely aligned.
Yeah, I
But
don't think, I mean, as usual.
but I'm going to I'm going to take another stab at this is not new.
Yeah, I
Okay?
agree.
And here's the reason I'm going to say it's not new. Here, the path to being an engineer, the path to being a good senior engineer is build a lot of stuff.
Okay.
And it's always been build a lot of stuff. That's always been the path.
I pausing for a second there because I feel like there's more than that. You
Mm,
had to build a lot of stuff. That's a threshold,
build a lot of
but
stuff.
you had to have that curiosity,
Yeah,
right?
build stuff and understand what you built. Like the number one question I ask people, like I've always done this before AI, the question I want to ask an engineer when I'm interviewing them is, tell me about a really cool project that you did
Yeah.
and tell me everything about it. Tell me how you built it. Tell me about the decisions you made,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That question is still a completely valid question in the world of AI.
I guess I think where I'm going a little different than you is that engineer now has to ask the LLM those questions,
Sure.
as opposed to maybe just being able to articulate why they made their decisions. They actually have to ask the LLM and then guide and then and then make a decision about
Yeah,
what
but
to do.
how did you do it before the LLM? How did you do it? You read books, you talked to other engineers, you looked at other code in the code base, you grabbed an open source project. Like every programming language starts with what? What does it start with? The Hello World app.
Yeah. Okay.
Like every programming language starts
Yeah.
with the Hello World app.
I guess there's something that I can't put my finger on, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I just feel like I'm speaking from my experience. I feel like a thing that helped me in my career. I guess this is just another way of saying what you had or saying about taste, of just having some intuition, what made software scalable and extensible and easier to maintain. And I don't know where that came. I don't feel like, I mean, without a doubt, I learned a ton of it along the way. Don't get me wrong. And I'm sure when I was at the beginning, I was not doing it that way. But I guess maybe for me, I feel like it just that part came very naturally to me. That was never, there were other parts of this job I struggled with, but that was a part that kind of clicked maybe early
I
for
think that
me.
there's certainly some people are going to have that part, like those parts of the job are going to come more naturally to them. I think that is
Yeah.
certainly a true statement. I think that,
Yeah.
we don't always necessarily know is that nature, nurture, whatever that might be. And I'm just making the only argument that I'm making here is I learned how to be, I think I'm a pretty damn good developer.
I
And
think you are too.
I learned how to be a
You're
good
the
developer.
best developer on this podcast for sure.
I mean, on this episode of the podcast.
No, this whole podcast.
But I am confident that I learned that by seeing what the other people did before me and iterating on it and being curious and building stuff, right? But all of that was in my computer science classes, right? We
Yeah.
had textbooks. We were given
Here.
assignments. We had to learn like, we had the theory of what a linked list was and how to
Mhm,
reverse the order of a linked list, like that was a
mhm.
assignment we were given, but we were given like pseudocode and explanations of it that then, you had to piece it together. But somewhat none of the code I've ever written in my life just was completely invented from whole cloth in my brain without having like
So,
significant
yeah,
experience ahead of
we,
time.
that's true. You know, I want to I was saying something personal a minute ago. I feel you were talking about learning. I feel like the thing. This is I'm gonna have an old man rant for a second.
Go for it.
I feel like the thing for me that made a real difference when I was a beginning developer was the debugger.
Oh yeah, you and I love the debugger.
We didn't have unit tests. I mean, they might have existed in the world, but certainly nothing I worked on had any sort of test automation. And as listeners of this podcast know, I've only really worked on online systems. So we put something out there and it would work or it'd crash. And I guess I just learned like one way to test your code before we had a manual tester go click through it is like just go through every line of this thing in the debugger, and you're in there. This goes back to your curiosity point. Change stuff, change variables in ways they're not supposed to be, and see what happens. See if it's behaving in the way you think it's going to behave, so that I could have the confidence that when I'm releasing this thing, I'm not going to break something. And I guess I owe that some early names of people that I worked with. But I guess maybe taught me that, right?
Yeah.
They taught me how to use the debugger, and that the debugger was a really important tool for understanding how the code that I wrote really worked.
And when you
And
were
to
in the
me,
debugger, what were you doing? You were
exploring.
you were essentially reading the code command by command as it walked through the code. Like, what a
Yeah,
great way to understand the code is to literally walk through it as it's executing and to poke it and push at it and see how it changed a variable or change a variable and see what happens on the next two lines, you know? Like that is a wonderful way to be curious and to learn about the code.
that's right. I really want to, for all the junior developers listening and in our enormous audience, there's probably four. It was that I really want to push on this part. It was the changing of the variables in the debugger to things that they weren't necessarily supposed to be, right? Essentially, I was writing my own little unit test of like, well, this says, go through this loop to the end of the array. What if I make the number bigger or smaller? What's going to
Right?
happen in this situation,
Right.
right? And kids don't use the debuggers today. That's all I'm trying to say. You darn kids.
Yeah, no, but if we rewind here, then I think that so okay, so we the topic I threw out there was okay, is agentic programming, is LLMs, is it making our coding skills atrophy, and are we failing to be able to grow junior engineers into senior engineers, right?
Hmm.
That's the thing that's out in the zeitgeist. And I'm gonna just repeat my stance on this. This has always been a problem.
Hmm.
It has always been a problem that there's a cohort of engineers who aren't curious and who just kind of cargo cult and download code from the internet, and they never really understood what they were doing. And
Hmm.
all of them were always limited in their ability to build things and
Hmm.
understand the things that they built. And now LLMs might be making it easier to get further without understanding what you're doing, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Totally fair point. And maybe, to your point, like it's easier to be lazy now and just to trust it. Okay,
Hmm.
fair point. But I would say if as a CTO or as an engineering manager who's wants to eventually let senior engineers retire, you know,
Hmm.
let those junior engineers build stuff, but hold them to the bar that you still need to be able to walk in and explain the code to me. You
Hmm.
still need to be able to come and tell me explain the architecture to me. Explain to me what
Hmm.
you built. Explain how it works. You can build so much faster. That means you're going to learn that much faster if you're curious. And everything that the LLM spits out, you learn how it did it. You learn what it did. You learn how to interrogate that. It's just an opportunity to learn so much faster and learn so many cool things.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I think the interesting question is if the LLMs are going to get good enough where that's not true any longer.
What do you mean by that? Like it'll get so good that I can't learn what it's doing, or that I
No, it's not necessary at all.
oh, it's not
I mean, like
necessary. That's
this is
different
this is
than
like a whole other
it's
podcast.
not necessary versus it's not possible, right? Like I like
Correct.
even it may not be necessary for me to. In fact, it is not necessary for me to learn how nuclear fission works
Or machine code.
or machine code. But if I'm curious, I still can go learn about that.
Yeah.
And the LLMs, because they're so good at telling, and yes, they make mistakes. Yes, they hallucinate. Yes, they abridge things. But guess what? Like, so does I was just talking to an engineer, which, like who's like a super like expert Kubernetes person, and like senior engineers were asking him, like, oh, what is going on there? And he's like explaining it, and then he goes, you know what? I'm gonna stop this part of the explanation. There's some more nuances here, but it's clear to me that you guys are already filled up with information, right?
Hmm.
So I'm going to just gloss over this part. But trust me, on the other end, it comes out over here,
Yeah.
right? Well, what was that if it was not like hallucinating the answer. Like, what what is hallucination if it's not analogies, right?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing. There's something we haven't talked about, which is something I was talking to somebody recently about. I've always been a believer in pair programming. I mean, personally, I just enjoy programming that way. It's more fun doing it with somebody else. And I think it's more effective. And I've been thinking a lot about this junior senior problem and if that's going to actually become a necessity,
Pair
pair
programming.
programming and
Yeah.
pair code reviewing too, by the way. Maybe, but based on what you're arguing, the answer is no, because as a junior engineer, I can go tell the LLM to write my code, and then I can go spend some time learning about what it does. There's, I'm just thinking out loud. On the other hand, there's market forces that are saying, don't think about what it does, just go faster. Look, we're going to be able to build, you've talked about it on this show, right? You're going to be able to build your applications on demand, right? You won't even need to buy software anymore. So there's these market forces that are pushing our industry to build software faster, which is going to push people to not, it's not going to incentivize people to learn that code for sure. It's going to incentivize them to pull the lever and get really good at pulling the slot machine lever. I don't know. I guess I'm just thinking this is all of mine. I have to be honest, this whole episode that we've been talking, this whole hour and a half or so, hour and 10 minutes, it is a little bit like in my head, it's a little bit mind bending in one's head. Like there's a lot of swirling around going on in there because it's just such a crazy time right now. I was talking to an investor last night, a venture capitalist investor guy. And I just said to him, I said, how are you I said, are you investing in AI right now? He said, no, we're not doing that. I was like, really? He's like, are you kidding? Come on, it's all AI all the time right now. That's all we're investing in. And so I asked him, I said, well, how do you think about the fact that it's just moving so fast that what's happening today, a year from now, 2 years from now, like as a business, to start a business, you need a little bit of time to let it unfold, to get customers, all these things, right? And so, how do you just think about the fact that we just don't even know what it's going to be like 2 years from now?
What's the answer?
Well, he said, investing is risky. He didn't have an answer. I think, I mean, look, his job, his business is to invest money, and he's doing the best he can given the circumstances, and it's
Yep.
risky, and he's trying to do the best he can to think that through. But I guess he could stop investing, right? And I'm sure there's some people out there that have. I'm sure there are some investors, some venture capitalists, some angels who've just said, "This is too crazy. I don't.
Yeah.
It's hard to, it's hard to know what's going to happen." Um, but this whole, I only bring that up because this whole conversation about the junior senior thing, like in some ways, it's just so very confusing to think about. Even if we've always had the problem, it's all just so everything's moving around so much right now. It's all just pretty wacky.
And it is moving very fast. I mean, the one thing that I will say, even though I'm convinced this is a problem we've always had, it's happening much faster. So that part I think is
Hmm.
a fair critique, right, of like my point. But I also just think there's a benefit there that if you are curious and you want to learn, it just gives you a chance to move that much faster in your learning.
Yeah, people who are curious are not going to have a problem in this industry going forward. That's for sure. And I think we've talked about the K-shaped economy. I think it'll be a little K-shaped in the industry too. And what I mean by that is, I think there'll be a set of software people, I'll just use people, who are building applications effectively WYSIWYG. I mean, they might not be vibe coding, they might be using spec-driven development or some other tools to make it more stable, but they're essentially going to be building on top of the flat platforms, and they're going to be letting um, the LLMs write the software. And to a large degree, like you say, they'll be pulling the slot machine lever. I mean, they might be really working really hard to feed great acceptance criteria and all sorts of information to the LLMs. That's going to be one branch of the K. And then the other branch of the K is actually going deeper, right? Those are the people who are working at Anthropic or wherever, who are building the models, who are building the tooling around the models, who are really still very deeply, deeply enmeshed in the technology and the part that's I guess they're closer to the metal. Ultimately, it's the same thing that we've always talked. We, not you and I, but the industry's always talked about. It's like There's going to be, I think we're going to be see a separation of people further away from the middle, so to speak, and then getting closer and closer to it. And maybe that's how it's always been. Maybe when Ruby came out or JavaScript came out or HTML came out, that's just what all the C++ developers were saying is, oh, none of these people know what's going on.
Yeah.
So I guess, what did they say about history? It doesn't repeat itself. It just rhymes.
It just rhymes. Exactly. There you go. All
Seems
right.
like
Well,
it might be repeating itself.
is
I don't
that
know.
is that how we were? Is that how we land it? Is that how we land this
I'm just landing it like confused.
plane?
Yeah, that's how we're landing this plane, Brad. This has been a good one. We fed the robot some of your topics, and then that one we got an hour out of. So it'll be fascinating to see if any of the others are equally as interesting.
There you go. Awesome. Well, it was great
Well, this has
talking
been
to you.
fun, Brad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good talking to you too.
All right.
Until next week, what's everyone here need to do? These 41
They need
people that
to
are listening to
they
podcasts.
need to smash that subscribe button. They need to rate and review, tell their friends, tell their moms.
Yep, tell your mom. Mom, what subscribe means is it's a way to follow a podcast so that it doesn't so that it's there every time,
Yeah,
in
there
case
you
you're
go.
wondering. All right.
All right.
Talk
Have
to
a
you
good
soon,
one.
Brad.
Bye. This episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was produced and edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.